Thank you so much. It's my first time doing a public talk like this, and I'm excited and nervous at the same time, and I hope I'm able to sort of deliver the reason why I'm here. As Caroline mentioned, firstly, I would like to thank Caroline. I would like to thank Burnside Library. They have been really welcoming to sort of supporting my idea of doing this talk. I just want to mention here that even though I'm doing a master's in autism, I'm certainly not a master of autism. I very rightfully believe that this title belongs to the people who are autistic and who have the lived experience. On my part, I'm truly privileged that I have been able to I have been able to experience this autistic journey through my son's eyes, but through my education, I have been part of this autistic journey in the way that I have been able to see the value of putting the autistic voices at the forefront. So honestly, it's nothing about me. Today, whatever I'm going to talk about, whatever ideas that I'm going to share about, whatever knowledge that I'm going to articulate in front of you people, that has all been honed by my education. My experience is that my son got diagnosed around 10 to 12 years ago back in Copenhagen. That's where his diagnosis went. And I moved to Adelaide around 6 years ago, and in between I'm from Pakistani background, so I've been visiting my parents as well. So one thing that I found common in all these countries, like if you talk about Pakistan, where autism and say any other disability is considered a stigma, versus these countries like Denmark, like Australia, one thing that I found common was that parents were struggling in what's the best way of bringing their child up who has been diagnosed with autism. And in my various interactions with these mothers from different cultural backgrounds, and in my own personal experience, which I find that we as parents who are raising these autistic kids have a lot of stress, and there's a lot of undue focus on them. They are under a lot of pressure to find that right solution to get their child fixed. And as it is, time is of essence. This is what they are told by the psychologists. And this is where I would like to incorporate the topic of neurodiversity as to how can we talk about neurodiversity and how it can help us think about the bright side of autism. I'm just going to put that down, and I'm sure I'm quite audible.
Mama,
as well.
turn it off.
Sorry?
Turn it off.
All right. Okay, so I started a small endeavor called the Green Pearls Consulting, and you can see the pace of my progress. I don't have a proper website, but I do write some small articles based on my knowledge and my experiences on my LinkedIn account. So this consulting is still a work in process, and hopefully next time when I do a talk, I would have a proper website where I'll be able to share more details of my work. Now, this is the outline. This is what some of the points I'll be talking about, which is what is autism, some facts and fiction that still exists about autism to this day, in spite of the fact that a lot of work has been done in this field, but there are still some myths lingering in this area. Then we talk about challenging the status quo, which is how autism for decades has been bound by core deficits assumptions, how we have always defined autism as a group of people who need to be identified by their deficits and not their strengths. So I'll be talking about that. Then that will bring me to introduce you to neurodiversity and its framework. And then some common misunderstandings about neurodiversity, just so that I can sort of help you make up this idea that neurodiversity is not just a fluff idea about thinking that all's well and good with autistic people. That's not what it is, and how to get a better idea of the neurodiversity framework, and then how we can apply this paradigm in practice. Okay, I hope I'm not going too fast. I'm all good, and all right. Yes, Judy? Okay. All right. So, I don't know how many parents, if you're attending here, have any child on the autism spectrum that you, okay. And let's say if a Martian comes to you and asks you what an apple is, you might define it by its shape and color. You'll say it's something round, it's something red or green in color, or you might define it by its nutrients. You'll say, well, this is something that if you eat, you'll get a lot of nutrients, vitamins, water, sugar, and all that. Or you'll just tell it that it's a fruit and it's something edible. So the reason why I mention this is that whatever you're going to say, there is no one right answer, right? And it all depends on what that Martian is interested to hear. So if he's hungry, he would be open to listening that it's something that is edible. And if he's willing to learn about its nutrients, you will tell him about the apple's nutritional value. And if he wants to know what it looks like, you will mention its physical characteristics. So in the same way, when we sit here in this gathering, I don't think that any one person will come up with a unique, with a a same definition of autism. We'll all define it based on our personal experiences. One of us, for example, for me, if you ask me like 5-6 years ago, for me, I would define autism in terms of the way it had impacted my family dynamics, in the way my son's challenging behavior was impacting, and still is to date. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but how our whole family has been affected by his emotional regulation. And someone else might talk about their child being nonverbal, while the third mother might say, well, he has a high IQ, he can talk, but then he has a learning disability. So, meaning thereby, autism is not just one thing. It's a spectrum. That's why it is called an autism. The S in autism, ASD, stands for the spectrum. But if you come across, I would also like to talk about the criteria which is used by the doctors and here in Australia, which they use to diagnose autism, and that's called the DSM-5, which is basically it's a manual of all mental health disabilities that can occur, and it's been developed by the American Psychiatric Association, and how they define autism is basically under 3 categories. Like an individual has to display persistent deficits in their social communication, in their social interaction, and thirdly, they need to have some special interest, some restricted or repetitive interest. And all these 3 facets, if a person has them to the point that it is impacting their life and the life of the family around them, then that's something that can make them put on, give them the label of autism spectrum. But for this presentation, I decided to put this quote from Jim Sinclair, who is a very famous he's an author, he's an academic, and like a very strong advocate of autism. He says that autism is a way of being. It is pervasive. It colors every experience, every sensation, every perception, thought, emotion, and encounter. And as I read this, I want to, for those who have the experience of having someone in the family on the autism spectrum, understand when I say that it impacts their every experience, their every emotion, their every perception, their every thought. Most of the times, back at home, when we are just having, we are sitting in a relaxed mood, and a joke on my side to my son turns into a huge emotional dysregulation for him. So I think that one small quip that I just, out of nowhere, I just passed a remark to him, and then he takes hours and hours to sort of recover. And my beautiful neighbor Judy's here as well, and I think she can be a testament to some of the, not so pleasant moments that we have at home, especially the weekends. They are a bit trouble. So, but then what I'm saying here is that that's him. That's his that's his personality. That's how his brain works. That's how his brain works. That's how he perceives that experience. So, in every aspect of the existence, it is not possible to separate autism from that person. So it's not a shell that is hiding that person, my son, inside, and if I just remove the shell out, and I will be able to uncover my son. No, it's not like that. And if it were possible, the person you would have left would not be the same person you started with. And I think here he's referring more to these interventions, to these therapies that we as parents, run after the therapist and try to sort of fix our son to the best possible way. But my personal experience says I've done that for my last 10, 12 years have all been about thinking about my son, thinking about what's the best way that I can make him look into my face, I can make him say hello when he comes across a stranger, I can make him do a small talk when we're out on the walk and we meet our neighbor. How can he just feel so calm but the important thing that I've concluded after all these years of experience is that I can't take autism out of him. And I think he is beautiful the way he is, but what I can do is to help him excel with whatever characteristics he has. So, okay, so now, here I'm going to discuss some of the facts and fictions that still remain around autism. And as I said, that it's really surprising that because when I first started studying about autism or learning about autism, and that is almost 10 years back now, 2012, whatever information that I had and whatever myths that I used to learn about autism, surprisingly, they still exist. So even though a lot of research and scientific output has been done on autism, but somehow these myths continue to hover around. All right. Now, I'm not going to talk about myths. I'm actually going to turn that myth into a fact statement. I'm going to tell you autism is not caused by refrigerated parenting. People say that there's this mythical creature, the refrigerated mother, whose bad parenting habits led to creating autism in the mother, in the child. And thankfully, what I can say is that thankfully that this myth has been largely dispelled, and we may not even need to flag it today. But the truth is that even today there is a lot of stress on parents. There's a lot of stress on parents. And any parent who is either, or anyone that you know right now who is either thinking of going for a diagnosis or is going through a diagnosis, and even post-diagnosis, goes through this immense stress of what did I do wrong to make this happen. So I think the entire idea behind is that we really need to have systems around where we can support the parents to sort of help them deal with the pressure that they are in. We all know that there is no one solution to a child who's diagnosed with autism. But what we know is, and what I've learned in my studies is, that by encouraging the parents to get to know their child, to get to know what their child is interested in, and do that more often, to help them create an environment a safe and a predictable environment at home that can sort of ward off the challenging behaviors that they come across almost every day. And basically to help them, to support them, give them advice on how they can, because they are not just dealing with that child, they have an entire family set up, they have an entire home to look after. So how to support the mother or the parents to make their family's adjustment and well-being as one priority. So I think, yeah, this one is definitely shouted off, and the need is to support the autistic parents.
Can you just explain refrigerated parenting? I've never heard that term.
So refrigerated parenting, it comes from the term that parents or the mother, it was specifically labeled for the mother, that she has been, as it is, the fridge is quite cold and it's unwarmly, and it's a place where she left the child, did not give her much attention, did not provide that warmth and care in the raising up, which led to the child developing autism, which led to the child. And to be honest, when I would read these myths when he was getting diagnosed, I would think about those insurmountable number of times when I did not take him out to the park so that he could interact with the other kids, and I just let him play at home. Why did I do that? Why didn't I give him that interaction? Why didn't I provide him the joy of playing with others? So, you know, and many such things, they really hit you hard as a mom or as a parent, as a father, as to what did we do wrong here? So, yeah, this is what basically it is, that you leave your child as it is, and one day you end up getting to know, oh, he has developed autism. Because, so, the next is, that's quite true, it is a biologically based disorder, but whether it is genetic, whether it is neurological, in spite of the fact that a lot of research has been done, to date, this remains elusive. I, or no one, no other big name in autism research today can actually say that autism is caused by, that blank still remains to be filled. What we do know is that it is a mixture of genetics, it is a neurological difference, a brain difference, it is how their brain works quite differently, but not other than this. All right? So, the next is, it is not confined to childhood, it is a lifelong disorder, so after a certain time I cannot say that once he reaches adolescent or once he's an adult, he's all fine and he's all okay in spite of you know, all the therapies that I've done with him to date, and he'll be a fully functional, normal child. No, that's not going to happen. Autism is going to stay with him throughout. And that's not a bad thing, I think, right? We are not telling that he's going to be sentenced by autism. All I think we need to tell him is that he needs to, you know, he needs to be proud of himself. He needs to see what are the things that he's good at, and he needs to, like if he wants to be an independent member of the society, then he really needs to see how he can contribute. So diverting your talk towards this side rather than, you know, crying tears in front of him that you'll always remain like this. Yeah, and it is, again, a very interesting overlap. So, I mean, Hollywood movies have somewhat given us the notion that every autistic child or every autistic individual is some savant, some person with some really high-level skills, either in maths or music or...
Exactly.
Sorry?
I have seen a movie where a surgeon was shown autistic,
Right.
and he was out of this world surgeon.
That's right. So, not all autistics are savants. Let's just make that clear. And not all savants are autistic. It is an interesting overlap, but what research has told us is that around 30% of individuals who are diagnosed on the autism spectrum also happen to have some skill which is above the general population level. But interestingly, that same person who would have a very good mastery of music or maths or computers would struggle in different facets, may be unable to have a you know, like a social interaction with others. So yeah, that's the beauty and that's the diversity of autism. found at all IQ levels, but is mostly accompanied by general learning difficulties. So you might find, or you may have heard of someone, a child who has a high, he has a normal fluent functioning language, but then he has a hard time, because of his learning difficulties. And again, autistic people have a very high ratio of developing a learning disability, because of which that learning disability is a huge barrier to the classrooms, because everything over there is set up for the neurotypical students. So yeah, that's one fact that we really need to think of. We really need to be aware of. Okay, so now let's talk about what is it in autism that I, or maybe even you, don't agree with. What are the things that we need to challenge about this topic? For that, I would like to take you back 10 years back to Copenhagen. That's where I was living. That's where I spent around 7 years before we moved here to Adelaide. And October 3rd, 4th, 2012, it's fall season in Copenhagen, and as it is, fall is fantastic in Copenhagen. The landscape is just lined up by all those deciduous trees in their beautiful rustic colors and burnt orange colors, and mixing up with that beautiful Scandinavian architecture. So I would, if there's one memory from Copenhagen, that has to be that fall weather. But at the same time, this season is synonymous with something that was quite shocking and put me and my family in a lot of distraught. And that was getting my son's diagnosis report. I mean, a year before that, we knew he was hardly like a year and a half, and we knew things. There's something different about him, for sure. He doesn't react to his name, that's right. He doesn't, he's not picking up language, I can see that. But what the diagnosis came, just put us under a lot of stress. So let's call him Johnny. That Johnny has, so interestingly, because I was in Copenhagen and they do all their, obviously it was in Danish, so once we met the psychologist, we went through the entire diagnosis process, and last final day we went and we at the adult and the child psychiatry unit of the public hospital. We met the psychologist, were told that yes, he is very much on the spectrum, and a few days later I received this Danish report, diagnosis report, which I then put under Google Translation, and this is how it came up. That your son has severe development difficulties. His language, motor, emotional and cognitive skills, I'm sorry I missed that part, has delayed in his development because of the major difficulties in relation to his social interaction and his communication, and a very low overall functioning of the cognitive testing that they conducted. We have reached the conclusion that your son has been diagnosed with, now this is a term that has now been done away with, we don't use it, the infantile autism, which is basically it was described for children under, I think, 6 years of age. And he has, this is how, he has an inferior intellectual. Now, you can very well imagine that till then I was wondering that, okay, maybe we can put him on a few therapies and get this done, but on reading something like that, what does it lead you to? That all your child is nothing but a bundle of deficits. All your child is nothing but a bundle of deficits. And this assumption remained with me for a very long time. And one of the reasons why I say myself, and I acknowledge it as well, I'm quite privileged to be doing an autism in master's studies, is because they have tried to dispel all these kind of notions. They satisfy me in a way that no one ever has been able to do it. I think it's a very interesting time I always tell myself it's a very interesting time to be a parent to an autistic child, because now there's a lot of work that is all about putting the autistic people at the forefront and saying that this is how, we accept us the way we are, and make adjustments for us in the environment for us to help us flourish. So, yeah, so I think that's where if you talk to any other parent as well, and this is what they would say, it's not so much about, and one point that I really want to mention is that I am in no way trying to say that there are not severe challenges in autism. I mean, we know that when you talk about autism, there's a high frequency of individuals who also have severe mental health problems, physical problems, intellectual problems, like intellectual disability, learning disability, or they have the highest ratio of anxiety is found in autistic people. So we are not denying the fact. But what we are saying is that we need a new way of thinking for autism. So, always defined by core deficit theories. Whatever study has been done, number one, it has been based on really small sample sizes. And the other thing that they have, for example, I don't know if any one of you have heard the theory of theory of mind. So, which clearly states that, I mean, the study was conducted in a way that two groups, one on the autism spectrum, and there's so much diversity in autism spectrum. I mean, I don't know how they incorporated that it is a uniform representation of autism, this set of children. And then on the other hand, they had children were developing neurotypically. So, of course, differences are to be, they are to be shown between the two groups of people, how they display themselves. And those differences, sadly, were said to be representative of the autistic category, that this is what they are made up of. And that's why the theory of mind was one model that came out of all this core deficit assumption. And this theory basically says that an autistic individual always has difficulty reading the other people's mind. And that's why they lack empathy, and they don't know what's going on the other person's mind. And I remember going to one of the occupational therapists here, the speech therapist here. I said, how do I teach my child theory of mind? What do I do? How do I put him in? And of course, I mean, I did make him go through these sessions, but then the whole idea there is that, am I trying to say that my son lacks emotions and that he's going to be, he's going to be a challenge for all, or he's going to turn out as someone who's very unkind? I know that I slipped my foot and I fractured my foot while we were in a playground, and he was the first one, and not his brother, younger brother, the so-called neurotypical, who ran to his brother and said, I think our mom's really injured. We really need to help her and get her back to the car. So there are times, I mean, and even in your personal experiences, who know individuals on the autism spectrum, our children don't lack empathy at all. So, but sadly, a lot of decades of research has labeled these children, these individuals, as a bundle of deficits. And what we have to do now is debunk this entire decade's worth of information that is out there and give the community a new way of thinking. And I think by holding these talks is one way of doing that. All right. Yeah, so this is, everything is severe. You take out any research paper, and I've been involved in my studies for the last 3 years, and it's so, I think you'll hardly find papers which start with saying that autism is a strength. It is always that it is a set of characteristics with severe disorders in blah, 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 in social communication, in social interaction. They have sensory processing disorders and all that. So the only topic that course that I have really enjoyed till now was all about identifying strengths in autistic people. And that really hit me hard, because that talked about why is it that we always portray an autistic person's special interest as a hindrance and not his strength. So yeah. So that's where I talk about challenging the status quo. This is what we need to do now. And that's what brings us to the concept of neurodiversity. In simple words, all this concept was this concept says is that there is no one brain that is more correct than any other kind of brain. There is no one brain that has more right to be here than any other kind of brain. In fact, just looking at this gathering, we're all, I can see, I mean, I'm from a different ethnicity. I have a different cultural background. The way I've been raised with, the notions that I have of enjoying life, for example, will be quite different from what you know and what you have experienced through. So I think we are a neurodiverse gatherings at the moment here, sitting here. So it was Judy Singer, again an academic and an advocate, who said, "We are now beginning to divide ourselves according to something new, differences in kinds of mind. Swinging the nature-nurture pendulum," so here she's probably referring to the refrigerated parenting, that it's something to do with the nurture that makes a child develop autism, back towards nature. So the important thing that she did with this concept was that she basically replaced the word disorder in the ASD, the word disorder or the deficit, with a difference. And she introduced this paradigm called, so this is what she says, that I define neurodiversity as a fact that all human beings vary in the way their brains work. We all take in information in different ways. We process it in different ways, and thus behave in quite different ways. And this is the framework that she has come across, which says that it is brain-based, and there is diversity. It's naturally occurring, and it is associated with a disability rights movement. Disability rights movement basically said that, it is okay to be different. So we are all different, but we are not less. So this is what their main mantra was under the neurodiversity framework. And an important thing which I'm going to discuss under the misunderstandings of neurodiversity is that although we are professing, or we are claiming that we are all different, it doesn't really mean that no one needs help. It is not equal to saying that a person who has an area of need should be ignored. This is not what we are saying. Neurodiversity says celebrate those differences and provide the support where they need. Yeah, and this was a slide I took from this talk on neurodiversity. And now we come to this, beautiful slide, which is, I think it's a really good way to explain neurodiversity, because what you see here is diversity, right? What you see here are trees, and these trees are naturally occurring. They have grown exactly as they should have, and here you see that if you see them as a group, it's a group of different trees, right? But there are some individual differences as well. So here you have an apple tree and a green tree, but then you also have a palm tree, a willow tree, a cherry blossom tree. Now, the whole idea behind this framework was that just like all these trees have equal value, and they all are sort of serving their own purpose, and they're all growing well the way they should, and they're all, in their way, are adding richness and diversity to the woodland that they're growing in, right? So they're all growing really well. They all look fine, right? But what do you think? What are the important factors that made them grow well? What makes them look so blooming?
They're allowed to be themselves.
They're allowed to be themselves. The environment that they have been allowed them to be themselves. The environment that they were grown in suited to their needs. Judy, if I'm not wrong, the palm tree likes to grow in dry, arid areas, right? Whereas your willow tree needs to be, it needs moisture, more moisture than the rest. So this is all that, like taking this beautiful, and I think this, even I was telling my kids when I was making this slide, and I told them that this is a very beautiful and an easy way of describing neurodiversity. You go out, you look at the different types of trees, and you see that if they are allowed to flourish, they would be given the nourishment according to their needs. And this truly explains the neurodiversity framework as well. Okay, a busy slide, but yeah, this one talks about the misunderstandings that we may have for neurodiversity. So it says here that neurodiversity is just a shift in language. So it's just a fancy way of saying the word disability. So, if you're working at a school and if there is a clause in your school policy under disability, all you can do is erase it and replace with neurodiversity. And that's what it is. But what it does is it runs the risk of failing to deliver the real kind of potential that neurodiversity offers, and that is the inclusivity. When we acknowledge that they are different, we also then have to make an effort to make them included in part of the environment that they are in. All right. The second misunderstanding is that it focuses only on the strengths and talents of individuals. So, although I find that for any individual, be it neurodiverse, be it neurotypical or neurodiverse, it's really helpful that we are able to identify their talents and strengths. If someone tells me that, Mona, you're really good at this, I feel happy about it. I'll feel more confident about myself, right? But then, this is again like a misunderstanding that if we just focus on their strengths and we don't go further where we are talking about providing them with the right job opportunities and other life opportunities that they want to identify, and we just stop at identifying their strengths, then yes, we are putting them at the risk of coming up with a strength. You need to show something that you are good at. Now that you're neurodiverse, you have to come up with something that is peculiar about you, which sets you apart from the rest. And that's what we are trying to dismiss, that this is not what we are doing. And of course, you're putting those neurodiverse individuals into categories that, okay, because he is good in maths, he's more valuable than the person who is struggling to read, write, and speak. And risk of emphasizing on individual rather than collective. This again goes against the notion of neurodiversity framework, which is all about that we are stronger together. And we are not talking about emphasizing on the individual goals, rather it's the collective that is stronger. And it also reminds us that diversity is a strength. Okay, this one's really important. I really want to highlight this, that it rejects the concept of disability. To say that neurodiversity precludes the idea that like neurodiverse people need any support needs, preclude the idea that they need any support needs, it's completely wrong. What we are saying is that by emphasizing that people are different from each other and by valuing those differences, we are not denying the fact that they also have support needs. My son, around a couple of years ago, was put off the NDIS plan on this one-line letter that came that he's not autistic enough. And at that time, as it is, we were struggling a lot with his challenging behaviors. So I think that's where they really need to learn that someone who even has a high IQ and can speak well doesn't really mean that they don't have any support needs. And to dismiss the notion that I think it's a heinous crime, because research also tells us that individuals on the autism spectrum are on a very high proportion of developing mental health diseases like anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, gastrointestinal problems, and so on and so forth, epilepsy. So yeah, this is what we are saying, that it doesn't reject the concept of disability. And yeah. So, applying the paradigm in practice. Now, this one's a bit, I'll just talk about the parenting, like reimagining parenting. I mean, I know that after listening to all this, you may say that it's very, you know, it all sounds really good, but when I go back and how do I really deal with that child who has a lot of emotional dysregulation? And I can tell you from what I've learned from my experience that once I started to accept that my child's brain functions in a very different way, once I started to stop defending myself, that I'm right and you're always wrong, and why is it that you're such a big trouble, that's where I was able to, you know, sort of give myself space, that I really need to enter his brain and get to see how he thinks. And that means that, you know, like if there's a sudden change of plans, how is it that I can give him time to sort of accept that change and move on without emotionally distorting himself. So, and I think, I mean, this is something that even applies to your neurotypical kids as well. We all have our days where we find that the kids are quite unreasonable for some way or the other. But for me, it was trying to get rid of the notion that he's disrespecting me. No, he's not. That's how he is. That's how he, even now, this idea, you know, like my phone was out, and because he's a computer and a IT gadgets geek, so he found this opportunity to keep the phone in his pocket while I was looking all around where the phone is. So, I mean, just taking a step back before and thinking about what's going on and why it's going on. That really helps. The next is reimagining schools in a neurodiverse world. Now, I put this because I've heard that the newly elected South Australian Prime Minister, Peter Malinauskas, if I'm spelling his name correct, he plans to come up with a neurodiverse policy in schools, and I think this is something really important and need of the hour, because I think because of the high ratio of autistic people that we find now in the society, it's really important that we begin this learning at the school level. So from the primary years, like from year 5 on, I would say, we start teaching kids, it is that maybe your fellow student, your class fellow is a bit, he thinks differently. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that way, and if the neurodiverse policy thinks on those lines, that would be a great idea. I mean, obviously it's not a magic wand that's going to fix up everything, but it's going to help the teachers, the students understand as to why Johnny likes to wear, covers his ears when he's in the class, or why does he need a sensory break and he wants to go out after every class to have a run and sort of do some core strengthening exercise before he comes back and takes his class. So I would like to share this slide that I saw. It's something that is being done in University of Edinburgh. They are going to launch this package in their public schools in Scotland. And just look, this is a glimpse of what they plan to put up in the schools. So these are posters which are telling children that neurodiversity includes everyone. It means that we are all different in how we think, feel. There is no right or wrong way to be. We all learn differently. So it is okay that if my friend is reading a book at the corner with his ears covered, we communicate and understand differently, and different people may find it easier or harder to communicate. And there are many ways that we can share this information. I can ask my friend to draw something about what he's happy if he's unable to have a conversation with me. And fairness is about meeting needs. I think that's really important. That's where the teachers as well in schools need to know. It's all about meeting needs. So if a child who is still struggling with his fine motor skills, it is okay with the idea of giving him an extra time to finish an assignment rather than putting him under the pressure of finishing that assignment on time. There are many ways to be a friend. And lastly, our choices, what we do make a difference. I wish I could have more access to this, and I wanted to share more information, but this is going to be launched on June 14th. and then, so if you just type like University of Edinburgh LEANS, LEANS, this is a research group in the University of Edinburgh that is coming up with this package. The next is Reimagining Job Places. Now many workplaces have started to identify the enormous benefit that they can have by bringing neurodiversity workforce in their offices. My husband, he's a professor at the University of Adelaide, and they are working on many projects in the cybersecurity with the government of Australia, where they are actually focusing on the ways of hiring neurodiverse individuals, because they know that they are the key to ward off the cyber security threats that the government faces on a daily basis. And why is it? We really need to talk about that as well. So that's because neurodiverse individuals bring with them a key sense of focus. You can't beat their focus. I've seen that with my child. No matter whatever, there's an earthquake going around them. If they are interested and focused on something, they would click to that. They would get glued, remain glued to that. They are very good at pattern recognition, and they also often find the needle in the haystack. So in that entire huge database that they have in front of them, they can identify where the error is. And yeah, so this is what the I would say the workplaces which are sort of forward-looking are coming up with the idea that if they want their workplace to be creative, to be productive, they need to have the neurodiverse workforce. And a lot of research is also being done in order to see how that recruitment of neurodiverse individuals can happen. You can't call them to the office for a recruitment interview, can you? They are now working on developing different recruitment tests that is going to cater to the needs of the autistic individuals. So I guess that brings me to the end. If anyone is interested in learning more about neurodiversity or having a really good and a very easy to understand knowledge of autism, I'll refer this book. It's by Sue Fletcher Watson. And wow, I mean, it's so when I first started my first ever course in autism, this was a book that really gave me a good knowledge and a good understanding of the autism mind. So if anyone's interested in that, please go ahead. Other than that, there's Dr. Stephen Shore. He was also the lead speaker at the Autism Essay Conferences, I think before the COVID thing in 2019 or so. He is an academic, he is an autistic advocate, and if you just write his name in YouTube and listen to his talk, where how his family worked on the strength-based model to help him what he is today, that's really encouraging. Autism CRC, now that's like a national resource. That's a really good work that has been done by the Australian government. So it's a national resource which talks about evidence-based practices, which talks about everything on scientific reasoning. So from the diagnosis to therapies, interventions, that's another good resource that you can find on autism. So it's going to cover a whole genre, like from children, adolescents, adults, for the assessment, as well as the entire lifespan of the diagnosis. They also talk about the qualifications of the person who's going to conduct the diagnosis. Yeah. So that's it. That brings me to the end of my talk. So.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you. It was very informative and very compassionate and very relatable. So thank you for bringing that to our community. Are you happy to answer some questions if anyone in the audience has got questions? So we can always just have some questions sort of in the group. And are you happy if people have got sort of maybe a question they don't feel comfortable asking in a group? You're happy to kind of just have a chat individually?
Them in any way? Why not? There's one thing that I'll just mention that, I mean, here maybe we have parents, grandparents of, or people who have a family friend like on the autism spectrum. I would always emphasize on don't depend too much on the internet, because internet is a place of some wild information out there as well. It is still selling this idea that giving snake oil to the child is going to help them get rid of autism. So it's really important that when you are reading on autism, you have to see that whether it's backed up by evidence, by some scientific research or not. And thankfully, in the times that we are living at, I've seen that now a lot of stress has been put on the evidence-based practices. And the true champions of these times are actually the autistic advocates themselves, those who have the lived experience. And they are the ones who are telling us that don't do anything about us without us. Listen to us, listen to what our needs are, and work accordingly. And on the one thing that I'm really happy about is that this new government launching a neurodiversity policy. So I'll be really looking forward to that.
Mm.
Yeah.